This video is brought to you by Brilliant. Last month, French President Emmanuel Macron caused quite a stir when he apparently suggested deploying Western troops against Russia. Now, Macron probably wasn't talking about deploying troops to the front lines, but rather in support roles. And he didn't actually advocate for it, but rather refused to actively rule the idea out, in order to create what he himself described as strategic ambiguity. A few days later, Putin responded by warning that direct NATO involvement could trigger a nuclear war. But Macron hit back almost immediately, signing a bilateral security deal with Ukraine and urging allies not to be cowards on the issue. Rhetorically, this is a marked shift from the French president, who used to be one of the loudest advocates for reconciliation, and who started the war by talking about off-ramps and security guarantees for Putin. So in this video, we're going to take a look at Macron's Ukraine strategy, how it's changed over time, and what explains this shift. So to understand quite how dramatically Macron's Ukraine policy has changed, it's worth taking a look at his foreign policy pre-Ukraine. This is a bit of a generalization, but broadly speaking, in the late 2010s, Macron's foreign policy was anti-NATO and pro-Russia, or at least more pro-Russia than the rest of Europe. When it came to NATO, Macron thought that the organisation made Europeans overly dependent on America, and therefore undermined the continent's ability to act independently, or, in Macron's language, achieve strategic autonomy. Macron also thought that NATO should focus more on the Middle East instead of Russia, but also that NATO's policy on the Middle East was fatally confused. In 2019, for instance, Macron famously described NATO as brain dead after Trump basically gave Turkey permission to attack Kurdish forces, who had previously been the West's main regional ally in the fight against ISIS. At the same time, France and Turkey were also on opposing sides in the Libyan civil war, and France was backing Greece in an escalating territorial dispute between Greece and Turkey over gas fields in the eastern Mediterranean. When it came to Russia, Macron's relatively pro-Russia stance really became apparent in 2019, when he gave a load of speeches basically advocating for reconciliation with Putin post-Crimea. After meeting with Putin in August 2019 at a joint press conference, Macron said Russia is very profoundly European, and that Russia fully belongs within a Europe of values. A week later, after hosting the annual G7 summit, Macron argued that pushing Russia from Europe is a profound strategic error, and that the European continent will never be stable, will never be in security if we don't pacify and clarify our relations with Russia. In this light, Russia's invasion of Ukraine was a massive strategic embarrassment for Macron. It made a mockery of his reconciliation efforts with Putin, reinvigorated NATO, and reminded the West why Turkey is such a vital strategic partner, thanks to its control over the Turkish Straits and the Black Sea. While France was one of Ukraine's staunchest supporters in the opening months of the war, providing significant military and economic aid, Macron nonetheless insisted that Russia would have to be brought back into the European fold eventually. In June 2022, he warned against humiliating Putin and suggested creating an exit ramp for Russia. As late as December 2022, Macron was talking about providing security guarantees, not for Ukraine, but for Russia after the war. Clearly, Macron's Ukraine policy has changed substantially since. While his recent comments about sending troops into Ukraine have dominated the headlines, and it can feel like quite a sudden shift, Macron's Ukraine policy actually started changing in 2023. In May, he gave a speech in Bratislava where he basically said he was wrong, and apologized to Central and Eastern Europe for not taking their warnings about Putin sufficiently seriously. It's genuinely quite an interesting speech, and it's worth reading if you've got time. In it, Macron, who less than a year earlier had called for security guarantees for Putin, comes out in favour of Ukrainian accession to NATO, and tells his Central and European peers, even after Slovakia and many other countries joined the Union, we did not always hear the voices you brought. Some said to you then that you were missing opportunities to pipe down, but I believe we sometimes missed opportunities to listen. This is a reference to comments made by then-President Jacques Chirac in 2003, when he told the EU candidate countries that they were missing an opportunity to shut up, when they came out in support of America's invasion of Iraq, describing their pro-America positioning as reckless and infantile. Then, late last year, Macron joined the UK in sending long-range missiles to Ukraine, and last month floated sending NATO troops into Ukraine. In the last few days, Macron's office has also released a handful of recordings of his conversation with both Putin and Zelensky around the invasion. Again, these recordings are pretty extraordinary, and we'd recommend listening to them if you've got the time. But in them, Putin basically promises Macron he's not going to invade, and says he appreciates their, quote, relationship of trust.
J'ai besoin que tu m'aides un peu. La situation sur la ligne de contact, elle est très tendue, mais est-ce que toi aussi tu peux vraiment appeler à calmer tes forces armées prépositionnées? Il y a eu beaucoup de bombardements hier. Si on veut donner une chance au dialogue, il faut calmer dans la région le jeu. Comment vois-tu l'évolution des exercices militaires?
Они идут по плану.
Donc ils se terminent ce soir, c'est ça?
Да, наверное, сегодня вечером там есть предложение войска оставить до тех пор, пока не угомонится на Донбассе. Ну, посмотрим. Сегодня выигрыш большой ему, да. Для меня это всегда большое удовольствие и честь встречаться с твоими коллегами из Соединенных Штатов, из Европы, с тобой тем более, ты знаешь, у нас хорошие отношения личные.
But it's not just Ukraine where Macron is pushing back against Russia now. Last month, France signed an arms deal with Armenia, previously one of Russia's allies and a member of the Russian-led Collective Security Treaty Organization, which has already prompted some irritation in Moscow. Then, earlier this month, Macron signed another military deal with Moldova after Moldovan authorities said they were worried about Russian forces stationed in the breakaway region of Transnistria. So, what explains this shift in Macron's Ukraine policy? Well, there might be a domestic element to it, insofar as Macron is trying to create political space between him and Le Pen, and draw attention to Le Pen's questionable record on Russia-related issues. But the overriding reason is that Macron has apparently finally recognised that taking the lead on Ukraine is the only way Macron is going to achieve his dream of European strategic autonomy. If Trump returns to the White House, which is what the bookies currently expect, or further Ukraine aid gets stuck in Congress, Europe will have to decide whether to sue for peace or provide significantly more aid to fill the gap left by America. Macron has clearly recognised that the only way to prove that Europe can be strategically autonomous is by doing the latter, and by demonstrating that Europe, especially heavyweights like France and Germany, can guarantee the continent's security by themselves. But while this might be a noble ambition, there's a gap here between Macron's rhetoric and reality, insofar as France's actual support for Ukraine has been pretty meagre. According to the Kiel Institute, France currently ranks 22nd among the EU's 27 members in terms of aid commitments to Ukraine relative to GDP, and Macron's recent bilateral security agreement with Kyiv promises further military assistance of up to €3 billion, less than half what the Germans will provide this month. In a sense, this is a recurring theme with Macron's foreign policy. He always wants to do more than France can actually afford. A lot of the stuff we talk about at TLDR can seem pretty complicated, especially when we dive deep into economics and detailed data, which is why we use Brilliant.org to keep us sharp. Brilliant is where you learn by doing, with thousands of interactive lessons in maths, data analysis, programming, and AI. Brilliant is a learning platform designed to be uniquely effective. Their first principles approach helps you build understanding from the ground up, which is also how we structure TLDR videos. Each lesson is filled with hands-on problem solving that lets you play with concepts, a method proven to be 6 times more effective than just watching lectures. Plus, all content on Brilliant is crafted by an award-winning team of teachers, researchers, and professionals from MIT, Caltech, Duke, Microsoft, Google, and more. Brilliant helps build your critical thinking skills through problem solving, not memorizing. So, while you're building real knowledge on specific topics, you'll also be becoming a better thinker. Learning a little every day is one of the most important things you can do, both for personal and professional growth. Brilliant helps you build real knowledge in just minutes a day, with fun lessons you can do whenever you have time. It's the opposite of mindless scrolling. Brilliant recently launched a ton of new content in data, all of which uses real-world data to train you to see trends and make better informed decisions, something politicians could really learn from. Anyway, these are for learners of any level to start or continue learning data analysis, with a fully built-out suite of new content, from Bayes' theorem to multiple linear regression. And you can truly learn by doing, as you'll be working with real datasets from sources like Starbucks, Twitter, Spotify, and more. To try everything Brilliant has to offer for free for a full 30 days, click on the link in the description. You'll also get 20% off an annual premium subscription. Thanks for watching, and thanks to Brilliant for their support of TLDR.